Blimpie, I'm guessing is a name that you have not thought of in a while, but they used to be one of the largest chains of sub-sandwich restaurants in the United States, widely known for their best-selling trademark sandwich called Blimpie Best that was being ordered by millions of customers each year. There was a time when you would see these all over the place, over 2,000 locations spread out across the country. Based on various reliable sources, here is my best attempt to put together a graph displaying the number of locations that they have been operating each year, and I think it's pretty clear that Blimpie has had a difficult 20 plus years, to say the least. And I would argue that a lot of their issues stem back even further. In fact, I might go so far as to say that there has never been a point throughout Blimpie's history where it has felt like a stable, promising company. Yeah, it has had a wild history with a few crucial missteps. So in this video, I want to talk about their history while doing my best to outline some of the biggest reasons that I believe are behind their decline. The first Blimpie was started by 3 men from New Jersey who had been friends in high school, reconnected at a party a few years later, and had the idea of starting a business together. They decided on a sandwich shop because they knew about one that seemed to be really popular that was over an hour's drive away, and they figured that they could be successful by replicating it in their own town. After a few months of research and a $2,000 loan from another friend of theirs, they were able to buy some used equipment and officially open for business on April 4th, 1964. Now that I think about it, I was exaggerating a little bit before when I said that the company never felt promising, because things were looking really good on that first day. There was a line waiting outside the door when they opened, and they were consistently busy until closing. They made $265 that day, which is pretty amazing considering that they were selling most of their sandwiches for less than 50 cents. The biggest reason behind that initial success was the fact that sub sandwiches had yet to become popular, especially in that area. There were no national chains, and I would be willing to bet that most of those customers were eating a sub sandwich for the first time that day. I would say that they almost stumbled upon one of America's next big foods, so of course they wanted to take advantage of it, and already that is leading me into the first reason behind their decline: rushing. Almost instantly, they were creating poor relationships and going into debt by failing to pay their suppliers and instead using all the money that they made to open more restaurants. It only took them 3 months to open 2 more Blimpies. The reasoning behind it there was that there was 3 of them so they could each run their own restaurants. But then they started franchising locations, and it quickly got to a point where they were so far behind on their payments that they were forced to sell all of the restaurants that they owned and become 100% franchised. So instead of making money from selling food to customers, they were making money from the franchisees, who would pay them for the right to open Blimpies and also a percentage of the money that they made from selling food to customers. I hope that all makes sense, because throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s, Blimpie was really aggressive in franchising. I think almost anyone would agree that they were too aggressive. They were making franchise agreements with just about anybody and leaving them mostly unsupervised, and you can see how that could lead to a million different problems. Geographically, they were scattered all over the place, complicating the deliveries and the advertising, but probably the biggest issue was the lack of uniformity. Many of the managers weren't enforcing their employees to wear uniforms. They were taking it upon themselves to use unapproved ingredients or even selling different types of food. Many of them weren't incredibly strict, keeping the restaurants clean or even following health codes. I mean, customers did not know what to expect when they were entering a Blimpie, and they quickly developed a negative reputation. The next reason behind their decline is the Border Cafe, and I'm guessing that almost no one has heard of this, considering it was a short-lived, upper-scale Mexican restaurant in Manhattan in the 1980s. See, by then, Tony Conza was the only one of the 3 founders that was still with the company, and it didn't even seem like he wanted to be there. He shifted all of his focus toward opening a new, unrelated restaurant called Border Cafe, or as he puts it, we started learning a lot about tequila and forgetting about bologna. He went on to open 2 more of them and even changed the name of the overall company to Astra Restaurant Group. Border Cafe was somewhat popular in the beginning, but quickly faded, and even Tony Conza admits that the whole endeavor was a huge mistake. You might be thinking that some of this doesn't quite add up. How can putting Blimpie on autopilot for just a few years be so detrimental? And I have an answer for that, but first I have to add a little more context by moving on to the third reason on my list: Competition. Consider that Blimpie was one of the originals. Most of the popular sub chains that we all know today were started after 1964, including Subway, who started 1 year later. So Blimpie had a head start in an emerging market and actually did take advantage of it in kind of a reckless way, but by the start of the 1980s, Blimpie and Subway were almost neck and neck. As far as I could tell, Subway had around 200 locations, and Blimpie was only a little bit behind them. But then, right when the market started exploding and becoming more competitive than ever, Tony Kanza chose to take his foot off of the accelerator and let Subway fly past him. Believe it or not, by the end of the decade, Blimpie was still hanging around 200 locations, maybe a little bit more, while Subway had grown to over 4,000. So now, Blimpie had fallen so far behind that it would be almost impossible to catch up to them, while they were still dealing with a negative reputation, inconsistent restaurants, and the franchisees were feeling more ignored than ever. Now, to his credit, Tony Kanza did jump back into things full force. He says he felt like giving up at that point, but forced himself to rediscover his passion for the business. He improved relationships, partially by visiting the franchisees. He started new quality control programs that helped make the restaurants cleaner and more like each other, and quite honestly, improved a lot of the issues. It was a little late, but he did set up Blimpie to take advantage of some big opportunities going into the 1990s. My next reason is debatable, but I'm going to say that part of their decline was due to opening smaller locations. Again, I promise, this is more impactful than it might seem at first. In the 1990s, cigarette sales went down, traditionally a huge moneymaker for convenience stores. So to compensate for those lost sales, it became a popular trend to open sandwich shops inside of those convenience stores. It's almost like a perfect fit because sandwich shops are simple, they don't require much equipment or space, and it's overall much easier to open one compared to other fast food concepts. They started opening shops not only in convenience stores, but in hospitals, colleges, bowling alleys. They even made these tiny carts and kiosks meant to be used at places like baseball games. So for anyone that was wondering how they were able to grow from 200 to 2,000 locations in a little more than a decade, this was a big part of it. Blimpie started squeezing themselves into anywhere they could, which, like I said, you could argue was a good thing for them for a while at least. The reason I have it on my list as a bad thing is partially because it's not ideal for visibility. A lot of them you can't even see from the street, so you're never going to think about Blimpie unless you're in a hospital or a ball game or something like that. But also because it was a fairly specific opportunity that quickly became saturated. Remember, as a franchising company, a lot of their revenue comes from franchising fees when someone opens a new restaurant. So when the openings started to slow down toward the end of the decade, their revenue suffered and their profits fell. The company was sold to a private investor group that was led by the franchisor of 44 Blimpies in California, and that is when everything started going really bad. I think a big part of it goes right back to my previous reason, competition. By the 2000s, Subway had only extended their lead, while Quiznos was surpassing them as well. Again, not the most stable situation over there either, but they were taking away market share. It seemed like everyone else was on the rise, while they were starting to fall, and in the end, I think a lot of it comes down to the final reason on my list, not standing out. Right from the beginning, like I said, that original Blimpie was almost like a copycat of a different sub shop. And by the way, that other sub shop that they were copying went on to evolve into a national chain called Jersey Mike's. I also have to point out that Blimpie uses similar colors compared to Subway, and I would say have a similar overall design and setup. Many of their commercials over the years have directly compared them to Subway, which I think makes them seem more like a Subway alternative rather than their own thing.
See this? This is a Subway stuff. This is a Blimpie best. Ooh, bigger.
Maybe you disagree with this, but to me, most of the others have a stronger identity. You know, like Subway, Eat Fresh. They used to have Jared and the $5 footlong. Quiznos had Toasty, and the Sponge Monkeys. I'm not saying that they were good, but they were memorable. And then there's the freaky fast delivery over at Jimmy John's. So I guess I'm asking, what is the equivalent for Blimpie? I guess the answer there would be simply Blimpie. That's the phrase that they would use in the 1990s. Probably not quite as strong as the others, so I think you get my argument here. By 2005, I think they realized that they weren't standing out. Their chief marketing officer said, "We're trying to separate ourselves from Subway, and we can't win by playing by the same rules." So their solution was to try and be a higher end option by upgrading their restaurants and the logo and offering some pricier panini type sandwiches, which may have been a good direction. It was at least something to make them stand out, but I think it fell apart in the execution. They promoted all of it with a multi-million-dollar ad campaign that featured a giant talking sandwich named Blimpie Blimpie guy that they say was inspired by the Jack-in-the-Box mascot, so again, not the most original idea. Nor do I see how this mascot named Blimpie guy reflects a higher-end establishment. Plus, 2005 leading into the recession may not have been the best timing to try to make themselves a pricier option. Meanwhile, Subway was making a killing during the recession with their $5 footlongs, so everything just kept unraveling further. My summary for this would be throughout their history, Blimpie has been good at attracting customers when there are not other direct alternatives, like in the beginning when they were the only sandwich shop in town, or when someone finds themselves in a convenience store or a hospital. But when it's anywhere near one of the competing major chains, I don't think that they have done a great job in standing out and drawing in the customers. Let me know in the comments, have you ever been to Blimpie, and if so, what do you think of it? Are you sad that they've been slowly shutting down, or are you happy to see them go? Also, do you agree with my list of reasons behind their decline, or do you think there's something that should be added or subtracted from it? And finally, what do you see for their future? Do they stand a chance at making a comeback, and what do they need to do to make that happen? And any other thoughts you have about Blimpie, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Before I go, really quick, I have to acknowledge that Blimpie is an incredible name, right? I have already said it 29 times in this video, and I wish I could have said it more. They came up with it by looking through a dictionary. They saw a picture of a blimp and thought it looked like one of these sandwiches. I think they were actually trying to name the sandwich, like how people have different names for it in different places, like a hoagie or a hero. Well, it hadn't really made its way to New Jersey yet, so I think they were trying to make Blimpie catch on as a general term for it. And boy, do I wish that it happened better than it did. Alright, just wanted to put that out there while bringing the count up to an even 30. Thank you for watching.